just gonna click through. Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to those. Oh, hi. Hi. We're so glad that you're here. And on Zoom. Thank you so much for being here. We wanted to really make sure that assessment and understanding the process of assessment was a focal point of our Shape the Trainer offerings this time. My name is Emily Ambrose. My pronouns are she and hers, and I work in training and talent development and assessment here in the Lory Student Center. And I'm here with my lovely co-host. Yep, co-host.
Come on down. I feel like if I were going to be a co-host, I would request a Bob Barker style microphone just for fun.
With the cord.
Yeah, for like future reference.
Okay,
Right.
noted.
Okay. So co-facilitating, Kacee Collard, Jarnot, she, her. I'm the Director of Assessment for the Division of Student Affairs, and we're going to talk about assessment today. It's so fun. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to offer like a cycle and some resources and those kinds of things too. So both like theoretical and practical.
So it's important for the Shape the Trainer workshop sessions to be grounded in the principles of community. You will see in our assessment as a process, we're going to be talking a lot about what is the institutional overarching, so principles of community being one of those things that we can assess to, as well as some of the commitments that we have in the Division of Student Affairs that we'll talk about next. Not now. The principles of community being inclusion, integrity, respect, service, and social justice, and always at the grounding of what we do, especially when talking about inclusion, equity, and the work for our students in this area.
So we're going to start with the overall assessment cycle, and we're using the model given to us by Kimberly Elsner. It's a more recent model, and I like this one because like, you can Google assessment cycle and find all kinds of cycles. I like this one because it centers around institutional, divisional, and departmental mission, and for many of us, it includes, for many of us, our mission, sort of our value statements, those kinds of things, hold or embody the things that Emily was just talking about. We center inclusion and diversity and belonging. All of those kinds of things sort of like trickle through our mission statements and values. And so we really want to make sure we're centering those in our process. And just quickly, you can kind of go around the circle with me, but this can happen, the assessment cycle happens at the very specific program level. So say we're creating CS Unity again this year. It works for that cycle. It works for an academic year cycle. It works for an entire unit versus one like very small nugget of a unit. So it's really universal in terms of how we operationalize assessment. So first we want to start with identifying the outcomes. At the end of this program, year, training session, etc., what are the things that we want people to be able to know, do, say, feel satisfied with, etc.? Then from there, how are we going to ask those questions? In what ways are we going to be able to say, we use this method to ask this question to make sure our outcomes were met? Then we plan, how are we going to do that? So thinking about, at the end of a program or service, do we offer a survey? Do we give people a quick QR code on the way out? Do we ask them a question as they're exiting, like a 1-minute paper kind of a thing as they're writing and they leave? But planning when, how, where, why are we going to do it? And then gathering methods, that's the doing of it. Then on the back end, this is where I think sometimes we fall short as a division and in our individual programs. We're good at collecting information. Then what, right? And so how do we then take the time to analyze or interpret what we learned, what we gathered, like read through all the results and say, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? How do we make meaning of that process? And then share the results so that we understand how to implement change. This cycle is built on continuous improvement. So the idea is we identify the outcomes, we assess, and at the end of it, we say, okay, we did these things well. We still want to work on these things. So maybe the next time we focus on keeping the things that we're doing well, but then we're going to tweak some of these things so then it can be better the next time around. Make sense? Okay.
So Kacee is really like, she lives and breathes this stuff and you get it. Like she understands it so well. I'm on the other side of the spectrum where I'm like, what are we doing? What? Hold on. And so that's why we make such a good team. Because I love doing the programs, right? I love supervising the humans. I love all that, and I am notoriously bad at like, oh, here, scan this QR code, and now we're never gonna look at that again until the next workshop series. Don't worry, I did that differently this year. Because assessment's now in my job title, which is really funny. But if I'm thinking about like an employee experience, right? If you identify outcomes in an employee experience, you want the employees to do the things that you want, but you also want them to stay a certain amount of time and maybe feel satisfied in the work that you're doing. Kyle will say that. So how am I gonna do that? And how will I know, right? So like, how are we gonna get feedback from the employees to do that? If that's the goal and the outcome, how do we do that? And then how do we go all the way through?
Yeah.
So making it like, oh, we're doing this, but how do we know that we're doing this? And that's the question that assessment seeks to answer. Ooh, backwards design. Can I start this one?
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love this. So, for folks who are like, systematic linear thinkers, they can go from one thing to one thing to one thing to one thing. And I'm a big ol' picture thinker. I'm like, well, why are we doing this, right? And that's why I love this slide, because the backwards design starts with the big, right? So I start every workshop with our principles of community, because I want to infuse and make you all thinking about how does this connect into respect of our employees, of our environments, of our communities? How does it connect into service in the ways that we're serving well, et cetera? The institution, to our Division of Student Affairs, our strategic plan that was just unveiled very recently, and our 4 sections and areas, right? And then, okay, if we're doing a program and I really wanna do the Candy Wagon of Joy, because that's a program that I think equates to equity-centered student success, and I'm gonna tell you how. I wanna think about what is the commitment, like what is the focus of the division, and how does that program or event, my Candy Wagon of Joy, connect to the division and institution, and how do I know that, right? So if I'm pulling around a candy wagon, and I'm like, you get a piece of candy, and you get a piece of candy, and oh my God, I love those shoes, and blah, 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 what it can connect to is some of the ways that we have focused in on these areas of student success, but I don't actually know that. I don't have any data around that because I just want to pass out candy.
And hug people.
And hug people consensually, don't worry.
Yeah.
So, but we deliver it forward, right? Before, I was just like, I want to throw around candy. And really, I think it was Rachel's initial idea, so I should give credit where credit is due, because I think she did it during finals week, and then we just brought it into.
A lot more than candy.
Those, okay, it was a lot more than candy. And probably she had a QR code to be like, oh, will you scan this and tell me that it was
Let's
good?
not go that far.
Let's not go that far, okay. But you deliver it forward, but then design it backwards, right? So it takes a little bit of thought into it.
The intention, this is the part that matters, right? Because we're not doing things in a vacuum. We do everything in alignment with like SLICE or the Lory Student Center or the Division of Student Affairs, right? And so thinking about how do those things map up and how am I showing, just as an example, the ways in which we're helping students construct knowledge at the institution, like learn things at an institution. We're thinking about that before we're delivering the program.
So it takes knowing some of those things about our institution, and it takes our leadership and all of the levels down talking about what's important to CSU as a whole, but also us as a division and departments. Ooh!
So this is said strategic plan, or at least the high points of the strategic plan. It's 1 page, it's linked here.
It is.
Thanks, Emily, nice work. And it is a 3-year strategic plan that's based in knowing our students, like deeply knowing our students, serving them and understanding them, knowing our staff, so being able to invest and empower in our staff, evolving our impact, so how are we making data-informed decisions and sharing our story, like collectively, how do we talk about the work that we do in the Division of Student Affairs, and evolving our division. Some things have happened, leadership changes, there's been all kinds of stuff over the last couple of years, and so how are we making sure as a result of that, we're aligning our structures and our resources to make it make sense for the student experience. And so when we're working towards these things, like everything kind of connects back together. Like we want to make sure we're aligning resources to be able to empower our staff and understand our students, right? They're all sort of interconnected points that are going to help us streamline some things as long as we assess it.
That's the goal. We're gonna get there. Culture change is long.
It's true.
And we're working hard.
It's very true.
This one specifically.
And within this strategic plan, we built, this is, the next slide is great.
Great.
Within the strategic plan, Vice President's Council built two frameworks that Emily's gonna share with you because she's embedded in the work on this campus. But it was important to us to not just say, this is how we're gonna have a strategic plan, it's gonna live on a shelf or whatever, but we're gonna use these frameworks to operationalize our strategic plan.
So when we say that and we want to connect the work to the why, it really comes back to experience, right? To student experience. So there are definitions on the screen that a lot of work came into putting forth. And I am someone who I like a one-liner, right? I like, what are we talking about here? As evidenced before, the big picture, right? So yes, the DSA engages students through a proactive, data-informed, asset-based, and collaborative approach to student success. But they do this by focusing on the areas, these are the three areas: student well-being, sense of belonging and purpose, and career development. Because we know from the research that we've been doing that mental health and the stresses and strain of well-being are the top reasons why students don't continue their matriculation at college. So well-being has to be a focus. We know that students come to college initially because they want a better job. And ultimately, they'll be better humans along the way as well. But so career development has to be up there. Then to focus on a sense of belonging and purpose, to have an environment and a community where they feel like they are a part of something, that they feel seen, that they feel welcomed, that even if they just know one staff member that they can go to and be like, Penny, I have no idea how to navigate financial aid. Can you help me? And Penny's like, that's not my job. There's a website for that. That is never a response that Penny would say, right? Penny would be like, come here, sit down, let's do this. And so it can't just be this though, right? We have to do this recognizing that for a long time, this has not been an equitable process, that people have intentionally been kept out of this process, people from different identities, people who have been pushed to the margins, right? We're talking about folks of color, we're talking about LGBTQ folks, we're talking about folks from different socioeconomic statuses. We're talking about a variety of different factors that recognize the historical and current context of our educational inequity. Our division has to recognize that in order to allocate our resources, divide up where our resources go, remove those barriers, and strategically shift the environments and experiences that are informed by a deeper understanding of our student needs and evidence-based practice. So if we go back to knowing our students, then we go back to being able to understand how through an equity-focused lens, we can focus on student success. Does this make sense to folks? So it was really important for us to harness this sense of belonging, this well-being and career development, really at the core of what the Division of Student Affairs does. Because if you can say, I used to think, right, I got my degree in student affairs, and people are like, what's student affairs? Affairs with students? And I'm like, oh, you're so funny. No, that's inappropriate and wrong. What are you talking about? Student affairs works towards creating environments where students can succeed through an equitable framework, through the areas of purpose and belonging, of career development and well-being. That is a beautiful one-liner that says exactly what we do. And if I can work in the bookstore and feel committed to that, if I can work in environmental services and feel connected to that, if I can work in student legal services or marketing or SLICE, a variety of places, if we can connect back to that why, then we can say, what are the programs and events that we're doing? Why are we doing this 25 workshop series session? Is this doing anything at all? Do people care? Or did my supervisor just tell me to come to that? Which if that's your reality, I totally understand. Thank you for being here, right? I kind of went on to a bandstand. I got so excited. I got really emotional about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, the context, right? When we talk about the backwards design, those last couple of slides for us are very helpful in understanding like some of that context of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're building into that. The next part of this presentation really goes into the logistics of like, when will you assess? Why will you assess? What will you assess? How? You know, all of those kinds of things. And so this is a way to start thinking about when is the right time to assess for your program, service, department, et cetera. And so there's 3 different kinds of assessing, or 3 different like entry points to when you can assess. So developmental is, it aids in like developing the program. So this one, I think, Kacee, personally, that this is one we use less frequently because a lot of us are dealing with programs and services that already exist. Like we've come into existing structures, right? But if you're building a new program or you're thinking about, you know what, we could be implementing this differently, so we're gonna scrap that, we're gonna sunset that program and start something new. If you wanted to, you could start by thinking about assessment as you're building the program. What, through the arc of the program, what would be important to capture about needs, satisfaction, learning, all of those kinds of things to help you then improve for the next time. So that's developmental, it's like before a program or event starts, and it's part of like how you build the program. Formative is during the program or service or event. And the best example I have for this one, there's probably a million more, so put your brain on, but thinking about, Emily and I both used to teach in the President's Leadership Program, and so there's many sessions, like all of our sections would come together in year 1 and talk about, you know, some kind of identity model or learning something about how we might show up as leaders through an activity intervention. And partway through that intervention, we're like, are people getting what we want them to get? So stopping, asking some questions midstream to then figure out how do we recalibrate to make sure we get to that end outcome that we wanted. So that's an example of formative.
No, I was thinking of classes like you have a 16-week course. At 8th week, your instructor is like, hey, how's this going? Are you learning the things that we wanted? Because we had a syllabus. Did you get this already? And then they can make changes and shift. Because oftentimes you fill those things out at the very end and they may or may not read them, and it might or might not impact the next one. So formative being kind of in the middle of. I like that.
Yeah. And then the summative is exactly what Emily just named, like at the end. I always think of programs and services, okay, how are we going to survey people at the end? How are we going to get that feedback at the end of what we did?
There's QR codes to your left and right.
Please.
It'll be at the end of the presentation.
Formative. Now it'll be formative.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, good. But how do you, at the end of a program or event, kind of capture that feedback? And so I think a lot of us would go towards summative in terms of like how we're currently structured, but that's not the only way you can do it. And so there's just a little graphic here that talks about the difference between the two. Like formative is tasting as you go, needs a little salt. Summative is at the end, tastes great. And then developmental is like you're walking through the farmer's market trying to figure out what are the fresh ingredients to make the thing that you want for today. So just a little visual for you. I love it. And then why will you assess? There's a tension in the assessment land. A lot of people say, well, we have to assess because we have to prove that what we did is worth our time, the money, students, fees, all of those kinds of things. That's a reality. It's not my favorite way to think about assessment. So the tension, right, between accountability and improvement, I think if we're looking for improvement, right, if we're going through that assessment cycle that we outlined and really focusing on that last part to say, what did we learn? And then how can we improve that and like share the results out at the end of it? If we are doing continuous improvement, the accountability is going to come because we already have the answers of the impact of this program and service because we're trying to continually make it better. So I lean towards the improvement side, but we always want to include equity, justice, and inclusion in the middle of these things because if we're centering on those historically marginalized populations that Emily was talking about in the equity frame, then we're providing services to students who maybe don't have their place or space on campus yet. Maybe we need to be thinking about how we're offering programs and services differently to satisfy a larger band of students and not just this is the way we've always done it, right? So centering those sort of thoughts in how are we improving over time will always make us better in our programs and services and always make them more inclusive and welcoming over time.
No, you said it great.
You had a face.
No, it was a good, I think it's a reminder for me about the importance of it, right? Because we can get so busy and so overwhelmed and it's like, what's next, what's next, what's next? And we have to figure out how to pause and do less better, right? And when I think about doing less better, it's like, what are those, if I'm doing 50 programs, how do I do 10 exceptionally because it's infused? So my accountability is there and I can look to what did we do before? How could it be even better? And how can it truly get at that sense of purpose and belonging, that well-being or that career development, right? Really focusing on that because of who has had access to it or who hasn't in the past. I can do it.
Okay.
So There are a variety of different kinds of assessment. This is going to be on your worksheet, on the front page to the right. So tracking usage, that's about counting, right? Like how many people are using it, what types of people are using it, do we collect demographics, what demographics do we collect, et cetera. A needs assessment assesses, ooh, we think something's missing here, we're not quite sure what. We're gonna ask some questions to better understand the experience of people and what we could provide that meets a need. This is a lot of how the Basic Needs initiative was supported and affirmed at CSU. Satisfaction assessment. So did you come to this workshop? Did you like it? Great. That would be satisfaction, right? Like how satisfied were you by the food at the catering event, by the service at the events coordination, whatever that is, that would be satisfaction. Gathering feedback for well, I did the first three, you go.
Oh, okay. Can I put an asterisk by the satisfaction assessment? In a lot of cases, this is important, right? If we're serving meals, if we're doing things like that, we want to know if people like the services. And oftentimes, that's not deep enough to really show the impact of a program or service, right? So these next couple of pieces sort of get at how do we get to that continuous improvement and impact piece, which is what assessment really is set out to do. So it's important, but also if you tell me, hey Kacee, we are going to continue doing this because people liked this session from Kacee and Emily, I'll be like, great, what did they learn?
Yeah.
My question, right? So yes, and I think I would put next to that. So gathering feedback for improvement is exactly what we were talking about in the assessment cycle. How are we collecting information and then really understanding it to know what to change for future iterations? Outcomes assessment. We do this at the Lory Student Center level. Penny also participates through Student Legal Services. But thinking about how are we designing outcomes to know what students are learning and articulate what students are learning in our programs and services? Our program outcomes are like, we're going to offer 25 workshops. Did we offer 25 workshops or did we not? Like, did we do the thing that we said we would do? And student success workshops. So looking at our student success framework, those three areas of sense of belonging and purpose, career development, and student well-being, how are we impacting students' persistence and graduation rates? How are students telling us, this is really important to me and this is part of why I stayed at CSU? Because I found my place, I found my space, I feel cared for in these ways. That's really central to the Division of Student Affairs, so we look at those at like the division level. Benchmarking is something that we do to try to see how we compare with other folks generally across the nation. And so, as an example, Lory Student Center participated in Sky Factor, which measures
The satisfaction, I'm kidding.
kind of.
It measures a bunch of different ways that people use the Lory Student Center and their satisfaction with it, but also what they get from it as well.
And then the people who administer that survey do it for a bunch of different campuses. So then the Lory Student Center is able to see how well we're doing in comparison to our peers across the nation. And so that's all benchmarking is.
Coincidentally, consistently, we get the highest marks across all of our peer institutions for cleanliness of our building.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such like an important aspect because people have a certain feeling because of the environments that we're in. So it can never be overstated how important the work that the environmental service team does. So
last time I looked, it was over 97% satisfaction.
boom.
For entryways, common areas, and restrooms, just so you know.
I'm like, she's like, let me tell you something.
I have some slides, we can talk about it later.
Yeah.
And then the last part is resource effectiveness. So sometimes you're looking at like how well are we using our money? How well are we marketing? How well are we like using the resources that we have to really make this program its best? And so that's a different kind of assessment, but equally important. It just really depends on what your aim is for what you're assessing.
Any questions? Yes.
Do you think satisfaction should be part of most assessment? Because if people say, oh, we love this presentation, you know, by Kacee and Emily, if people, numbers will increase over time. I don't know, like. People
Yeah.
look at me like, what is going on? But then people pay attention because they enjoy it, right? So should lots of these things be intertwined together, which makes a longer assessment and less likely for people to respond?
Yes. Right, so we have to pick and choose. We have to be strategic about the ways in which we ask people questions because people, particularly post-pandemic times, are not really keen to take online surveys because I don't actually want to stare at my computer anymore. Once upon a time, it used to be that we would say a good response rate for a survey, like a big broad survey across a campus like this, is 40%.
What? Those days are gone.
And now our partners in institutional research are like, if you get a double digits response rate, like 10%, you're doing good, right? So we have to think about that. Like that is just realistic for the times that we're living in right now, Penny. So I appreciate you bringing it up. But you can ask, did you like this? Did you like this program or service? And what did you learn from it? Like 2 quick questions that kind of get us there. And I think about satisfaction for food for about like dietary needs. Were you satisfied with your options for dietary? Like there's specific things that we really deeply care about satisfaction, and for other things we also probably care about learning.
The dual is important, right? And it will show us different things that over time it would be interesting to assess too, because there's lots of components that go into this. I think about like alumni at in the President's Leadership Program and would love to assess, hey, did anything that we taught you stick? Because that matters. And some of the best instructors that I've had, I don't like them very much, mostly because they pushed me to achieve more than I wanted to and to learn and grow more than I wanted to. So those 2 questions together, did you like it and what do you learn? They assess very different things, right? Do we have any questions from online, B? Anything that we can, any here? We've covered a lot in a short amount of time.
Be willing for the facilitation one, thank you.
Me?
Go.
You go.
Okay. No, you.
Okay, so
We clearly planned this out very well.
obviously, yeah.
Bestie's on stage.
But the assessment is planned out well, so you should.
Not into it, just not what I could
When
do.
it's summative at the end, you could do it. Okay, so going back to the worksheet, which B is shared into the chat for our online folks and for here in front of you, you have a little checkbox, right? So the steps that need to be included in your assessment include, why are you doing this? What is the purpose? Right, to what end? Where are you going and how do you work backwards from there, right? That's that backwards design. So what do you want to accomplish? Maybe that's that outcome, maybe it's satisfaction, whatever those are. Purpose statement. Identify stakeholders. Who's involved in this as well? Who is needed to be able to plan some of this? Who will you assess when this is part of it? What program? What's your audience there? Who are the stakeholders? Would you say anything about stakeholders differently?
But later, go ahead.
Okay, examine existing data. This is typically where I falter, but I'm getting better. So, right, the examining existing data is, do we have other things that we can look at that would go for it, right? So if I'm looking at employment and I'm looking at performance review is a type of assessment, right? When we give performance evaluations, we started with a purpose statement, typically of a work plan or some sort of initial conversation at the beginning of the year, and then you're assessing it at the end of it, right? So if you examine existing data and you're like, oh, we have all these work plans and performance evaluations, and they have not been great over the course of where or what are we doing that can inform kind of how this can go, right? What existing data exists.
And don't reinvent the wheel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like ask questions. What of this do we already have so that you don't feel like you have to capture everything? Because fun fact, students don't know that our systems don't connect and that our surveys don't talk to one another. So when I ask a question about demographics and Emily asks questions about demographics, students are like, I already told you this, but I gotta tell you this again. Because we didn't know we asked each other that question. We didn't know that data already existed.
So true. Determine what data to collect, and from whom, right? So that goes a bit towards stakeholders, but also who your audience is and what information you're trying to gather. What's your time frame of it, right? So is it something that's going to be over the course of, I want a strong response rate over 2 weeks, or this is something that's going to be an open feedback link, like the informal gatherings link that we have, right? What's our time frame? The data collection tool and collecting data. So data collection tool can be a fancy term for the survey, or the question at the end of a workshop, or the 1-minute paper that you have done, or the informal conversation with a student about their employment, whatever. What is the data collection tool, and how will you collect it and record it? How will you look and analyze it, then share the results and closing the loop?
So, Again, I think the part that we always have an opportunity to be better at is the sharing results and closing the loop. And closing the loop, people are like, what does that mean? How many of you have participated in a survey or a focus group or a research project and you poured your heart and soul into it because I have thoughts about this, only to never hear anything about it ever again? I hate that for us. I don't want that for us. And so closing the loop means, how are you taking what you've learned and what you plan to do about it and sharing it back with the people who are impacted? So we're doing a research project on campus about the student experience. And when we get all of our results together, part of our job will be to share back to students who participated. Thank you so much for your time. You got a Ram Cash gift card. But also, here's the results that came as a result of that, and here's what we're going to do about it, right? So closing the loop goes back to stakeholders, because like you were saying, who needs to be there to plan the event or whatever? Jessica thank you, might or might not care about what students learned as a result of participating in the program, but she might care about the setup, about what we learned about the physical environment that moved forward from there. And so thinking about who needs to know what and making sure that you're communicating back with people helps ensure that they'll participate next time.
It also builds trust, right? So I remember 2 years ago, we did a feedback survey with environmental services with their career staff. And we not only had like a form that they could fill out, but there was a listening session, and the commitment was made to say, this is what we heard, this is what we're addressing first, and these are some things that are on our mind to look forward to. And it was shared out in an email, and it just creates that loop. It was a bit of an informal assessment, but it was asking, what's your experience working in this area, and how can we make that better for you? If it's not only about pay, how can we increase or encourage your environment? And this is what we're gonna do. And some of it was like, put a whiteboard in the break room or something like that, like things that are so easy to be done. And it's like, oh, that would help so much, but we didn't know if we didn't ask. So that sharing results and closing the loop can be so important.
We only have a few more slides, I promise. So this just kind of gets at what methods will you use to assess. There's not a one size fits all, and I think in a lot of cases we tend to go to surveys because it's an easy way to collect information in one place, and then we have it when we need it, kind of a thing. That's not always the best mechanism. And like I said, people are kind of done, people are kind of done with surveys, right? So I got one from my energy company today, and I'm like, I cannot, I do not have time for you. So these are different ways. This isn't like necessarily exhaustive, but different ways that you can assess. And so surveys, focus group interviews, in a lot of cases, you need input from people. You need feedback from people. So thinking about the intentional way to do that is really helpful and can get at a lot of the different kinds of assessments that Emily named earlier. Document review, sometimes it's as easy as saying, okay, our student employee handbook says we're going to cover these things during onboarding. Here's our training agenda. Did we cover those things or not, right? Like we just assessed, did we do the thing we said we would do, right? Resource effectiveness, looking at budgets and spreadsheets, those kinds of things. A heat nap, I love me a good heat nap. And the last time we did one, or the last time I did one, is when we were, El Centro every year does a graduation survey. So students, to get their graduation stoles, complete a survey about their experience at CSU. And one of the questions that we asked was around, where do you find community on campus? And so we did a heat map showing all the different places that people find community on campus. El Centro and Key and C4E were the largest communities, had the darkest colors because of the heat map.
That's cool.
Yeah, so things like that where people can see the visual, where you're sharing information but not a lot of words, can be helpful for people. And I love heat maps. I'm just gonna say it again. And then the cost benefit analysis sometimes is really around resource effectiveness, and that's really looking at return on investment. Like, are we doing as much as we can with our dollars and time?
Sick assessment, 40 minutes. That was impressive.
We got one more.
What?
I know, sorry.
We have one more.
Right.
I just Bob Barkered it.
Remember we talked about resources?
Yeah, we did.
I added them.
She added them. And she told me to review the slide, and I didn't. So she's gonna take this one.
You know these things though.
I do.
So we have access to a lot of things. People still say, sometimes the survey is gonna be still the best way to assess this program or service. Cool, awesome. We have 2 free platforms that people can log into to create said surveys and send them out. So here's the links to those. Here's some training videos for both of them, videos and just word training. I don't think they're video training on Qualtrics. Different. We always want to make sure we're centering equity in our assessment, the way we ask questions, the way we administer the survey, and what languages we administer the survey. Trust me, this is a work in progress, and I like to think that we're getting better over time, and I always need refreshers for myself. So in what ways can we educate ourselves on how to ask good questions? And then resource-wise, we partnered with the Office of Inclusive Excellence and EAB, which is like a National Educational Advisory Board, I think is what it stands for, but they're like a national research company, to do demographic wording suggestions, because people like to ask about demographics. So let's make sure we're doing it consistently and in alignment with best practices at our institution. So there's a link to some examples there. We have our own assessment cycle, so you can see how this works within the Division of Student Affairs, if you are so inclined. And then we talked about a little bit about how do we map what we're doing up to the division and university level. So one example of how we do that is through, we have learning outcomes in the Division of Student Affairs, and those map to our institutional learning objectives. And so I'll stop and just ask a question for fun. How many of you knew we had institutional learning objectives? I'll work on that too. So don't worry, it's there for you.
Like,
My
a lot of
answer
the
is,
leadership
I don't know.
Don't know.
at the institution don't know that they're institutional
Yeah,
leaders.
yeah.
We actually need to rework them pretty significantly, but as it stands, we do have a document that maps what we have to what we have.
Do you want me to click on any of these to show that they work?
Whichever, do your
The
choice.
demographic question.
Yes. Oh.
I like that one.
What's very cool is if you do this assessment at the end of the workshop, the demographic examples. So what I've done in Qualtrics, right, because we have started to host most of what?
Ryan updated this page, he's so good.
He's so good. So in Qualtrics, we have like a question bank where I've now held them, and now I can just input them into the surveys that I do, because this is always so arduous of like typing it out every time, and it's so nice to be able to say, oh, this is the one. Wait, which is the one that OIE helped work with? Oh, this is the one, and I just copy it over, and it's so nice.
Work smarter, not harder. Also, these change, so just check back.
Thanks.
Yeah. Because we just updated, if you'll scroll down, we just updated disabilities. We used to have ask disabilities, like the last climate survey asked disability yes or no. And then we're like, that's not super useful. So let's add it, let's go a little broader. And then people can tell us if they want to. There's, in every single one of these, there's like a no thank you, I would not like to participate. Prefer not to respond are the better words. But in every single one of those, there is one of those. I need to add that there.
Nice.
Any questions online? Great. Not great, we're happy to answer them if you have them. Looking at you.
Great check-in.
Okay, so in theory, we have 8 minutes left and would love, that's fast, don't look at it.
You can't fix earlier, it's fine.
The idea is that we really wanted to make this a workshop, right? So this might be more applicable for some of us than others, but we want like sometimes we can be like, oh yeah, that's great, and then we throw it away or whatever. If you do nothing with this information in the next 24 to 48 hours, it will be like you didn't come to this workshop at all. So we wanted to give you a resource to be able to do it. So you'll see that on the back of your worksheet or on page 2, it has steps included in your assessment. And it has those steps that we went through very quickly, right? So if I'm looking at, I'm gonna use Laura's, one of Laura's, just for fun. I don't know if you already do this, so full disclaimer, I'm making this up off the top of my head out of a program that I know is very cool. So the program, event, or initiative, I know that in LSC marketing, there is like an end of the year portfolio that the students do that I believe directly connects to equity-centered career development. Thank you. So if I'm gonna put student portfolios there, the purpose is to create an experiential opportunity for students to demonstrate their work, therefore providing something they can show their employers later on. Maybe, right? If you identify stakeholders, who's involved. Did you say something, the next thing you were gonna say about stakeholders before?
Closing the loop, you gotta tie it back to the same.
You gotta tell the people what you did and that you know it. Yep. So who are the stakeholders that are involved in it, as well as, well, that's gonna be determined with the data. So the stakeholders, So I would say that those are not only the students who are doing the portfolios, but the other staff members who are giving feedback in it and maybe helping the creation of it, as well as the people that you invited. I got to go this year, which was really fun. And so I might be a stakeholder there too, just inserting myself, it's fine.
It's like I have positive feedback for you, Laura.
Examine the existing data, right? Did we do this before? Did it work? Do we have feedback? Do we know? Determine what data to collect and from whom. So if we go to the purpose statement and say, how does this connect back to our institutional equity-minded student success, our principles of community, right? What is the data and from who? Our audience is the students. Time frame during this end of the year, right? Data collection tool is going to be 3 questions at the end of it in the feedback session. I don't know, it might be, right? We're gonna analyze that by someone that will be the note taker, answering those questions in a semi-focus group of how it went. And analyze that after the students leave and we can take a breath from the 900 projects that you all are doing and analyze like, oh, we said we were gonna do that, the students said that it helped, and they have something to take back, and then we're gonna share that back. And it might be that, 95% of our students left CSU with a job secured. Which is awesome. And we're gonna share that with our LSC leadership team, and then we're gonna celebrate the heck out of things, right? There you go.
So I think there's a couple of things on what Emily just said. I think that could induce panic of like, how do I design this and how do I know that I did it right? And I think you gotta just try it, right? The only way we know is to try something and then say that didn't work, or we're gonna do that better, or we asked this question, but the way we worded it, we got this response when we were hoping for a different response. So we're gonna reword it. Like that's the continuous improvement, is next year we're gonna reword that question and hopefully get like a better kind of response.
Yeah.
And another thing that could be done there, right, so maybe it is a survey, but also maybe it's a document review for Laura and her team to say, when we look at what we engaged with across our work this year, 50% were on student programs and services. These were around DEI initiatives, these were around student belonging, like whatever the categories are that are important, that you've decided are important, that's a document review, then it helps you understand where you're spending your time and resources.
So we only have you for a couple more minutes, and you're gonna take this worksheet hopefully away with you. The one that I would like you to contribute to or think about is, what is one thing that you can do after this to invest in success in this area, right? So will you review the slides that we went over? Will you put into your calendar some time to actually think about a program or initiative and how to tie it back to the institutional connections? Will you talk to your staff about infusing better assessment into the things that we're doing in order to answer the question, how are we being a direct contributor to equity-centered student success in the Division of Student Affairs?
Will you click on the links? Will you reach out to Emily and Kacee and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about my specific program, because I'm better brainstorming.
It's true. The QR code that you will see is the one that I've been referencing the entirety of it, and you'll get to see the demographics at the very end if you want those examples. I think you are correct about the updating of the, but I'll need to do that.
I also like the stars in here, they make me very happy.
That's all, Cami.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cami, if you're online. I don't even know if you're. And with that, we are happy to stick around and answer any questions. We committed you to 45 minutes. I can't believe we got through it all.
Did we?
Did we?
You'll tell us. We're gonna learn together on the assessment.
It's true.
We appreciate your time now very much. Not everybody loves talking about this, but
We do. Woo! Thank you to our online folks.
appreciate it.
Thank you all very much, thank you.